Hey guys, this is Jesse from Project FDL. Today we're going to assemble an FDL 2X blaster, though this video applies to both an FDL 2 Plus and an FDL 2X. What I'm going to do is I'm going to build this blaster up until the point where the 2 Plus and the 2X start to differ, and then I'm going to cut and then do a second video that applies to the 2X specifically, and then another video that applies to the 2 Plus specifically. To start, let's go over the tools that you're going to need. Number one is a Phillips head screwdriver. Now I'm going to use an electric screwdriver, but if you guys have never put screws in a 3D print before, there is the possibility of stripping them out. I've used this screwdriver a bunch of times. I know, just how tight it needs to go. I know the sound of the screwdriver and everything, but I would actually recommend that you would use something like a regular, number 2 Phillips screwdriver. So that's the main tool. We have 3 different Allen drivers. I have a 1.5 millimeter, a 2 millimeter, and a 2.5 millimeter Allen driver. In addition to that, I have 2 small Allen keys. One of them is a 3/32 of an inch Allen key, and then the other one is a 1/16 of an inch Allen key. I have a pair of wire snips. This is mostly just for when we start getting into wire management and you zip tie stuff down, just to clip off the ends of the zip ties. And then also I have a little tube of Loctite blue, and this goes on the threads of your flywheels and also the threads of your pusher motor, just to keep them from backing out and getting loose. Okay, so this video basically assumes that you've purchased a bundle. And then you have printed all of your own parts, or maybe you've purchased a kit where we printed your parts and then put a bundle together for you. Regardless, you have a whole bunch of loose 3D printed parts and a whole bunch of loose electronics. So what a 2X bundle looks like is you have the board with the screen on it. So this is your UI as well as the brain of your entire blaster. You have your DC pusher motor. Now this is in a 2 Plus and a 2X, as is the little DCP board that drives the pusher motor. You have a couple bags of screws and various hardware. You have your 2 brushless motors. This build in particular, I'm using these red ones, but most of the time they are green unless you guys request red. This ESC Power Distribution bundle. So in older builds of the 2 Plus, or really the original 2 as well, these shipped with loose ESCs, and then there was another kind of wiring harness. I have started now just combining these all together, so you get this nice little bundle right out of the package. It makes building way easier, and it really cuts down on a lot of loose wiring inside the blaster. And then outside of those, you really just have a bunch of different wires. You have like your trigger button, your battery adapter, your main power switch, pusher, limit switches, and then a couple other various control wires. Okay, so from there, then we have all of our 3D prints. Now this build is actually a very special build because this is the first time that we have hydro dipped any of our builds. So we had a customer ask if we could do this, and then Jackie took it upon herself to go and learn how to hydro dip, and it came out really, really well, and I'm super excited to see this all come together. There are a couple places on these prints that you need to drill the holes out. This piece in particular where you mount your brushless motors to, I have to drill through here. And then also all of the holes that receive screws need to be tapped out. So in addition to the tools that I mentioned before, you'll actually need a 632 tap and a 1032 tap as well. So we have our barrel, our Magwell, electronics cover, handle, we've got our 2 side plates, pusher, and then really just a bunch of various other prints that we will talk about as the build goes on. Let's open up these bags of hardware and kind of go over what's inside of here. One of the bags is all of your machine screws. All the screws are a common 632 size, but there are 4 different lengths that you'll encounter. You'll encounter a 3/8, a 1/2 inch, Here's a 3/4 of an inch and an inch long. And then in the other bag, there are a few different things in here. One, there is a spring for your mag release. When I send springs out, I will send a whole spring. What I usually do is clip off a tiny bit on the end of the spring to make your mag release a little bit easier to push. I've already gone ahead and done that on this one. You have a 1032 set screw, so this goes in your pusher, actually in your spinner, which your pusher attaches to. Then we have several of these M3x8 hex head screws. These are what mount your brushless motors to your barrel. And then you have a bunch of these little tiny, these are M2x5 flathead screws. Those are what you're going to use to mount your flywheels onto your motors. And then you have one single number 10 washer, and that's going to go on your pusher mechanism. Alright, so how this works is I usually start basically from the front of the blaster. I do the front half, and then once I get the front half completely built, then I do the back half. Now the back half is where things are going to start to get different between the 2 Plus and the 2X. So I'm going to mainly focus on getting the entire front half together right now, and just a little bit of the back half as well. Alright, so first thing, find your barrel piece. Now most likely your barrel is going to be a little shorter. This is actually a 2V extended barrel. So this is your main barrel, and then you have a cap, and then you have a piece that slides on the front that creates like, more Picatinny rails, and then there's a single rail that goes across the top. Functionally, these go together and act exactly the same as the normal short barrel, but it's just a little longer and a little different. Start with this piece, and I'm going to grab my 2 brushless motors. The motors mount here right on these kind of semicircular areas, and if you look through here, there is a slot in the back of the barrel that the wires from the motors feed through. So I usually take these and kind of flatten them out and then feed the wires through that slot. You should be able to get all 3 of them through. Okay. So once you get them fed through, kind of locate that on the mount, and then we take a singular M3x8 hex head screw and our 2.5 millimeter Allen driver, and I will usually push this one screw through so you can see it, and then get it lined up with the screw hole on the motor itself, and then lightly tighten that one so that the motor can still move back and forth. Now these slots create a bit of an angle with the wire, so the motor is going to want to mount with the wire kind of angled towards the center. The way the holes in the bottom line up with the motor though, the wire needs to point straight back. So what I usually do is take like your Allen driver and kind of point the wire straight back. And when you get it in the right spot, you can see the holes align through the holes in the top. And then we can snug these up pretty tight. So like I mentioned before, if you're screwing screws into a 3D print, you have to be really careful how hard you tighten them. You really only need them like hand snug. You don't need to get them really tight. Otherwise you risk stripping out your holes. This case in particular, you are screwing into the metal of the motor, so you can get these pretty snug, and you do want them pretty tight just for the sake of holding the motor in place. So I will usually do 2 screws in the motor on either side, and then once we go through and we verify that these motors work and everything's good, then we'll come through and we'll put the second set of screws in there. So there you go, now you have your brushless motors mounted onto your barrel. Okay, so next up we are going to mount the barrel with the motors on it onto the Magwell. Your Magwell is the probably the biggest piece in all of your build. This is where the mag slides in, and you'll have a mag release in the bottom. If you look at the front, there are two angled slots that match the shape of the two angled slots that the wires come out of on the barrel. So what you want to do is flatten the wires out on either side and feed them through those slots just enough to get past the connectors. Once you get them far enough in, then you can kind of push the rest of the wire slack up against there. Now to mount the front to the Magwell, you need 4 of the 1/2-inch machine screws. And this step in particular, you're going to want a fairly long screwdriver so you can get at these screws from the lowest angle possible. This is admittedly a little bit of a tricky point in the assembly. There you go. Now you have your barrel mounted to your Magwell. Okay, now we are going to throw the flywheels on and then put the barrel cap on here with that slide piece as well, and then put the front grip on. So your flywheels, I have found in the past that because of vibration, the screws like to loosen up a little bit. So that's why I suggested using this the Loctite blue thread locker. So what I usually do, and you shake this up a little bit, I will usually kind of dribble like a single drop, and not even enough that it drops out of there, but kind of let it hang on the bottom of there. And then grab your 1.5 millimeter Allen key and your 2 flywheels. Get one flywheel kind of positioned on there. And then you grab your tiny M2x5 flathead screws. And then on each one of these, I get it on the tip of the Allen driver. And I get just a little bit on there. You don't want to like douse this in Loctite. You want just a little, like a little drop on each one. And then until you get all 4 screws in there, just put them in very lightly. If you tighten one screw down first, and this is the same as like if you're changing your tire, you run the risk of this going on here at like not perfectly level. So the idea is put all 4 of them in loose and then tighten them up. Another little drop of that, and we will do the other flywheel. Okay, and then when you do finally tighten the flywheels, you can get these fairly snug. You want to be careful to not squish through the print though, but you do want it fairly tight because you don't want your flywheels loosening up. Okay, after that we can assemble the cap onto here. So you need 4 1/2-inch machine screws. And then this Picatinny rail slide piece slides over the front. And then this mounts in place with 4 of the 3/8 machine screws. This piece can also slide forward and back. Okay, next up, as of the 2X, the Magwell has changed a little bit, and one of the things that we did with the Magwell was we added this rail piece on the front of here. So the purpose of that rail is to receive this angled front grip. And we've got a couple versions of these. This one in particular is the ribbed one. So you can slide this on the front and then secure it with a 3/8 inch machine screw. That'll hold that in place. And then along the top, I've added a slot in the top of the Magwell. The purpose of that slot is for a LED lighting package that I'm working on that will be available at some point in the future. But the Magwell being such a large piece, I wanted to get as many of these little features into this as possible. So I basically just left a spot in the top of the Magwell for a LED kind of fixture to slide in. This build in particular does not have that though, so we kind of have just this blank insert piece that slides in, and the angles on the top of it will hold it in place. And then over the top of that we have this extended barrel piece. On a regular build without the extended barrel, this piece would only extend to about here. This one in particular extends all the way across the Magwell and all the way down the front of the barrel. This one secures in place with 4 3/8 machine screws. Now after that we want to start getting your battery wiring in here. So you grab this pusher guide piece. So the purpose of the pusher guide is you have this kind of half circle shape that your pusher rides in, and it guides it forward and back, and it prevents it from wiggling back and forth too much. And then this piece also serves as some wire routing for your battery adapter. You grab your battery adapter that has the XT60 connector on one end, and then a tab connector and a bullet connector on the other side. If you look at this, there is a circular opening that your power switch goes in. If you turn it around backwards, you want to feed your battery adapter in from the back into these 2 slots, and you want to put the red wire through on the same side as the power switch. So from this viewpoint, that is the right side, and then the black wire goes in the left side. Then push it in a little bit, and then route your wires down in the channels right next to those holes. The length that is sticking out right now is not super important because that is adjustable later on. And then this piece, you want to hold the wires in those channels and then locate it on the back of the Magwell right there. And then it secures in place with 4 1/2-inch machine screws. Okay, once you get your battery adapter here, you can adjust the length of these wires. You want to adjust it so that if you look at the heat shrink, you can see where the connector ends on the XT60 connector. You want the connectors to be just past that last corner on the Magwell. Here you go. And then once you get those in place, you can put the main power switch in. So on the main power switch you have a line and a circle. The line points towards the front of the blaster, and there is a notch on the side here that matches the notch on the side of the switch. And this just presses in place. Be really careful that you don't push super hard. If for whatever reason this doesn't want to go in, you may need to get into that hole and sand it out a little bit, or whatever you need for that to just kind of pop into place. There you go. Then on the other side of the pusher guide, there is now a little square opening. The purpose of this is for the future lighting package. There's a switch that goes there, but in the meantime there is this tiny little cap piece that kind of just pops into place here and just fills that hole. Okay, so once you have everything in your pusher guide, you can go ahead and plug in the red wire into one of the tabs on the switch. Now, these 2 tab connections are extremely snug, and you want them that way, so it takes a little bit of wiggling and pushing against that tab before you get that connection in place. Okay, once you get that there, you can grab your ESC Power Distro bundle. If you look at this, the way this plays out, you have your red connection, and then this plugs into your main power switch, and then you have a black connection on the other side. So you want to line that up so that the red is on the left side and the black is on the right side. And then off of this bundle, you have 3 wires on one side. They are yellow, red, black, and then the same 3 wires on the other side. Those 2 groups of 3 wires slide through these angle slots, very similar to the slots that were on the front of the Magwell, but those will slide through and then your motors will connect to those. And then on one side here you have two black and red wires. These go to the voltmeter on the 2+ or the battery connection on the back of the 2X. And then the other one goes into your DCP board that actually powers the pusher motor. We want to connect the red plug to the power switch, like that. And then on the left side, right behind that red plug, there are two what appear to be servo connectors. So these actually power the microcontroller, which would be the Photon and the Plus, or the MicroView and the X. So these are orange, red, and brown or black. Those kind of go underneath, out of the way, and then you grab your motor wires and feed them through that angled slot there. And then you can see they start coming out this slot on the other side. Now when you go to connect your motor wires, you want these fed through enough that you can actually pick them up at a little bit of an angle. That'll prevent when you plug the wires from them sliding back through that slot. And also in the meantime, it doesn't matter which of these three wires plugs into the wires on the ESC. The way the brushless motors work, if they are spinning the wrong way, you flip any two of those wires and it'll spin the opposite direction. Right now we're really not concerned about that, we just want to get these wires hooked up. Okay, so do the same on the other side. You grab the three motor wires, feed them through that angled slot. You feed them through far enough so that you can grab underneath them and prevent them from sliding back through, and hook up your motor wires. Now on the back, you've connected the red connector from the power distribution here, but not the black. So the black, the remaining slack that comes from your battery adapter here, I usually will pull across and then bend it back, and it connects to the distribution bundle. That way you get kind of a little bit of a loop at the back of this bundle. And then I take a zip tie and I feed it under the bundle in such a way that it comes out the top, and I zip that whole thing in place right there. Not super snug, you don't want to do this really tight, otherwise you risk damaging some of the components on your ESCs. You just want to hold that whole bundle in place right there, and then snip off the excess. Alright, and then last thing, on the front of the blaster, you have two pieces that form your handle guard. On this particular build, this white piece is your inner guard, and then the other piece is your battery flap. So the inner guard mounts underneath the pusher guide here. And if you look underneath here, there's a slot that the top of this piece actually fits in. And then if you look on the back of here, there's a couple of kind of bump sort of things in the design here, and the purpose of those is actually to clamp those wires against the Magwell so that when you go to pull your battery out, you can just pull against there. Now if you have an older build, that clamp is not there, so you can't just yank on your wire. This is actually a new design as of the 2X, and it just makes it easier to plug and unplug your battery. But to mount this, you need a 1/2-inch machine screw. And I usually do this on my lap, so I apologize if this seems a little awkward. But what you want to do, there is sort of like a center piece that the screw goes through. You want to slide that up and down these wires a little bit and make sure that the red wire goes on one side of it and the black wire goes on the other side. So that pretty much concludes the front portion of the blaster. This thing's starting to look really, really cool. Okay, so let's start on the rear of the blaster. So let's grab this rear plate piece. So this is your kind of main structural piece on the back of the blaster. It holds your pusher motor here, a couple of your limit switches, and then your side plates connect to it, and then your handle connects underneath that. Grab your DC pusher motor, and then we are going to pull the Loctite out again. So the pusher motor attaches to the rear plate with these two silver, these are M3x6 flathead screws, and these go on using your 2mm Allen driver. So like we did with the flywheels, we're going to put a little bit of Loctite on there to keep the screws from backing out. So the pusher motor goes in that opening there, and you can kind of get the holes lined up here ahead of time before you put the screws in. I usually orient this so that the wire faces towards the front of the blaster. So you know the back of the blaster, because it is this flat surface on the back of the rear plate, the front surface has this kind of protrusion that sticks out. So like we did with the flywheels, I squeezed just a little drop of that Loctite out and apply a little bit to the screw. Again, you don't want to douse the screw, you just want like a little drop on there. And then the second one, and we get the second one in, we can tighten that down pretty snug. This is another place on the blaster where you are screwing into the metal of a motor, so you can get those pretty tight. And that is the last that we will use the Loctite. So next up, we grab your spinner. The mechanism that actually pushes the dart is what is called a Scotch yoke. Scotch yoke is made up of a combination between a circular motion, which then turns into a reciprocating motion like this. So as the spinner turns, there is a post here that rides in this gap on the pusher, and as it spins, the pusher pushes back and forth. So first things first, we need to get the set screw into here. Now this is, when you are going through and you tap all your pieces, this is the only place where you need that 1032 tap. You get in there and you tap it out and you make room for that set screw. So the set screw requires the 3/32 Allen key. We'll screw it in until you just barely see it poke through the hole. Now, if you look at the motor, this is a D-shaped shaft, so there is a flattened portion of this shaft. If you look at your spinner, there is also a flat side. Now, if you look at your spinner, now this doesn't really matter which way you put this on. What I like to do though, the top side of a print has a little bit of a texture to it. The underside of a print, because it sits on the flat bed, has a little bit of a flatter texture to it. I like that to face the pusher motor. So line up the flat spots. And then push your spinner on. Now your spinner should only push down far enough so that it is flush with the shaft of the motor. Once you get that in place, snug up the set screw, and then that's on there. Now we are going to mount the pusher onto the spinner, and that requires the 3/4 machine screw, the washer, and then there's a small cylindrical print that slides on right after that washer. Now when you mount the pusher onto the spinner, one side of the pusher has a little bit of an arc to it, the other side is flat. You want the flat side facing up and the arc facing against the spinner. So we take this entire assembly here, and get that started. Now this is one place on the blaster that I do still like to use a hand screwdriver. Now just before you tighten that down, there is a little bit of slop of this washer here. And you want to get that as centered onto that screw as possible. It doesn't have to be perfect, but if it's too far to one side, there is a chance that it'll rub against the inside of the blaster and then you run into some issues. Okay, so now that we have that on, you grab your 2 pusher limit switches. So one of these has 2 green wires, one of these has 2 gray wires. You can see on one end there's kind of a slide-on connector, and then the other side there is a very small micro switch. The green one goes in the rear of the rear plate. So there's a hole right here that the connector slides down through, and then there is an opening in the plate that switch should fit perfectly into. And then you have 2 caps that go on top of the micro switches. The one at the back looks like this small rectangular piece with the 2 openings for screws. We'll put that one on first. And then this takes 2 3/8 machine screws. When you put this on, make sure that everything is lined up correctly. There is a small, tiny opening on the back of there that a small post on the micro switch fits into. So you want to make sure that this is properly aligned before you tighten this down. Alright, and then the one on the front doesn't have a hole that it slides in. You just put the switch right in the opening. And then on the inside of each of these caps, I didn't mention this on the last one, there is a kind of a protrusion on that cap, and then there's also a protrusion on the rear plate itself. So you just want to match the shape of the cap to the shape of the plate. And again, this one secures with a 3/8 machine screw. Okay, so that is about as far as we're going to get with the rear plate before we start seeing differences between the 2 Plus and the 2X. So we will set that to the side and then grab your handle and your trigger button. So your trigger button will have a nut and a lock washer on it. We want to remove that. Set those down. And then the wire of your trigger button goes through the opening on the front, and for now you want to guide the wire up through the rectangular opening here. And you push the switch into place, and then you go lock washer and then the nut. I did forget to mention one tool, and that is kind of a long set of needle nose pliers. It doesn't have to be super tight, it just has to be tight enough for that lock washer to engage and for this to not flop around. Alright, so once you get that in there, you need to wire the wire from the trigger button up through this kind of wire management here. So what I usually do is I take the connector and I give it a little bit of a fold. And then you can take the connector and string it up through that opening there, first off. And then you will see this kind of windy wire guide here. What this actually is 2 tabs that the wire will sit underneath. So you want to keep the wire flat and wind it through that path. And get it down underneath those tabs. Once you get it into place, if you pull the wire back a little bit with your finger here, it should pop right under those tabs. And then you have your handle ready to go. One other thing that we didn't do on the front was put your mag release together. So the mag release is made up of this small block. So this is the mag release block, a post piece, and then this small catch piece, and then also the spring. So what I usually do is take the small Allen key, this is the 1/16 Allen key, and then the way these pieces go together is you have your post, and there's a little bit of a hook that kind of goes off to the right. And then you have your catch that forms a triangle on the front here, and the post goes through the catch, and then you should see the shape form that is in that block. Kind of set that down together. And then your spring goes in there. And then you take your Allen key and you compress that spring like that. And then once the spring is compressed, you can just drop the assembly of the two other pieces in there and then pull the Allen key out. And it should work pretty smooth. If for whatever reason this doesn't work smooth, you can put some white lithium or silicone grease in there to try and get it to work smoothly. If you printed it and you extruded it heavy, or just like things don't seem to fit, you can get in there and you can use like an X-Acto knife or sand some of the pieces down just to try to get them smooth. Once you get that together, this piece slides in the opening at the back of the magwell here. And then it's secured in place with two of the 1-inch machine screws. And then you really only want to tighten these just enough for them to seat flush here. If you tighten them too much, it'll actually squeeze the whole magwell in a little bit, and your mags may actually fit a little too tight in there. If you do want them to fit tighter, that's kind of how you can adjust it. You can tighten those down a little bit. But this one actually went together really well, and it feels really smooth. Okay, so at this point, that's about as far as I can go without things diverging between the 2 Plus and the 2X. The 2 Plus and the 2X have kind of different side panels that go on them, and a little bit of a different method of connecting the trigger, and then naturally the electronics and stuff inside the electronics cover are different too. So thank you for watching part 1 of this assembly video. I'll put a link in the description below, depending on whether you're building a 2 Plus or 2X, which video you should go to next. We will carry on building this particular blaster as a 2X. If you go and you watch the rest of the 2 Plus video, it's likely that it's going to be a totally different blaster. Cool, thanks guys, we'll catch you in part 2.